Hello, everybody. We're just admitting people.
Bill, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks.
Are you okay? I wasn't sure. I was off last week. Wasn't sure if you were going to be back with us so soon. Is the recovery going well?
Yeah, I'm just not allowed out mowing yet.
You're not allowed to drive yet, Phil, are you?
I can't get my brain working again.
Oh, good. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
You just need your brain today.
That's fine.
So we might as well start then. I'll admit people as they join. So welcome everybody to week 8, module 8, and this is employee engagement and leading change. So quite an interesting session today. And today we've got Isuru. You remember he was here on week 1 as well. So welcome back, Isuru. I'll just hand you over to everybody now.
Perfect. So thank you and welcome everyone. And it's good to see some familiar faces at the very beginning, myself and Alan were on the session. So yeah, I mean, we've got a really interesting topic today with leadership and also how change, I think particularly relevant for many businesses that are definitely going through change, as well as probably have gone through change already, who could probably start reflecting on some of those things as we build the discussion. So hopefully there'll be some engagement that we can build as we go along. And let me first share the slides with you all. I hope this is visible. Yeah, perfect. Right. So let's just get things moving. So I hope you are sort of finding your way in terms of how the program is being structured, especially from the very beginning, where we are now at the, I would say, some of the core areas where you worked on the sort of overall organizational structure, sort of design, and now moving into actually how sort of change could be brought into the equation. And what's interesting with the topic, basically in this regard, is that we are not simply talking about change as an isolated incident, but then we are also looking at it from sort of the employee perspective, and also how sort of leadership needs to really understand both sides of the equation when change is being introduced. Now, in terms of what we can really expect from the session, firstly, in terms of knowledge-wise, I think it's a nice balance where we're introducing some of the more technical models, such as the force field analysis and the Cutlass model, which you might have heard or not heard. So we will sort of run through that as a sort of core area. And then based on that, we'll sort of start getting into more of the sort of actual skill sets where you will have a better understanding, especially things such as how employees engage. I think there'll be a lot of examples that you might also be able to bring into the table, and how leaders themselves need to feel motivated and have the urge for changes to go through. And then with that sort of understanding, we can finally go into the action side of things, where we are then looking at delivering on these promises, and as well as how some of those changes are being trickled down to the other sort of senior colleagues, as well as the lower level employees in terms of the organization. So that's basically how we are sort of thinking of the learning and action outcomes. So hoping to cover sort of these sort of 4 areas. Don't know why it says section 3. So leading successful change, and then change cannot happen individually. We need people obviously coming on board with change. And then if people are to come on board, how do we keep them engaged? I think that's very important. And then how leadership also needs to change as we proceed. So those are sort of basic areas that we are going to cover. Let's see where we start. So first of all, when we talk about leading successful change, now I would just like to ask you, or any one of you, what does change mean to you? If anyone's interested in putting an idea forward, what does change mean to you from experience? Does anyone wants to chip in? From experience, any ideas, any suggestions?
Movement from where you are just now.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Not,
Yeah, I
to be, not to be afraid of taking on new initiatives and maybe delegating those initiatives to your team that you can identifying your team's strengths and weaknesses and giving them jobs that suit that.
Excellent, Angela. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that's very good. I mean, change is also about sort of driving and then giving people, I mean, that courage. I mean, yes, you want to move from, let's say, place A to B, but then to do that, you need to understand this is not just an individual task. How do we get people on board with this task, and sort of moving forward is extremely important. Now, change do happen for so many different reasons, and again, there can be multiple reasons. We'll go through that as we go along, but most changes, you're looking for opportunities for growth and opportunities to be successful. I think it's very fair to say with the pandemic, obviously there were a lot of forced changes on many businesses, but if you were to look at this from a very entrepreneurial mindset, you could say that some of those forced changes actually brought about some good things, such as the importance of, let's say, e-commerce platforms, etc., for SMEs, and as we go along. So let's look at a couple of basic things, or a few things, why change is important, or why change needs to be brought into the equation. And again, as I said, changes can be brought into the equation for growth potential, but if you were to really dissect this at different levels, I mean, first of all, you are looking to change the way you engage with your customers. And again, engaging with customers is important because customer preferences and tastes do change with time, and you still need to sort of keep up with these changes. Your customer bases do also change, whether it is local customers, whether it's international. Again, this is where change needs to come into place. And again, you might decide, if you've got multiple products or you are in multiple markets, certain markets might be profitable, certain areas might not be profitable. So again, that can be another reason why you want to change your ways around. Improving efficiency, process improvements, all this also brings about changes. Now, the job roles also do change. Again, if you are in certain areas, for example, certain job roles can be redundant, especially with things like AI coming into the equation. So you might also want to think about certain changes that comes in, which also might not be very positive in certain cases. You might be facing certain job losses. But again, from a wider perspective of the organization, I think these are some of the things that you'll have to keep a track of. And then, yes, change also brings about a lot of changes in people's mindsets and culture, which is, as a leader, we need to keep in our mind, but this is something we can keep a track of as we go along. Now, just to get things undergoing, I just wanted you to reflect on something, just to start things off. Now, I hope that all of you from your respective businesses would have gone through some kind of change. So what I want you to do is maybe share some ideas. Again, we can have a small discussion. So you can take around 5 to 10 minutes. Just think of some of the changes that you've gone through as an organization. And just think of whether those changes were successful, and if not, why. So I would like you to maybe reflect on that for a little bit. So is that something that we can do maybe for 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes? Yeah. So you could maybe write a few points, or if there's anything, just take a bit of time to reflect on this, and then we'll have a short discussion, if that's okay. So we'll take, 10 minutes. Guys, just because of time, shall we just leave this for 5 minutes and then we can have a discussion as well for the next 5 minutes? So I'll give you a couple more minutes if that's all right. Yeah. Yeah. I see a couple more people still jotting down a few things, so a few more minutes. Right, I think we can start. In no particular order, should I just take it from this? Anyone wants to go first? Any thoughts?
Yeah, we can. Bells, we're happy to go
Yes.
first if you want.
Yes,
yeah.
Justin. Yes, please.
Couple of big ones for us over the last sort of 12 months, 18 months. First
Okay.
one being inflation and having to react to everything that's happening around us, the cost of everything to obviously make the products we make. So reaching out and getting CPIs and having to go through that, not just once, but 3 times over the last 18 months, has been a challenge. And another one for us is gaining significant new business with a known label product with one of the main retailers. Increased our sort of operations like by a significant number. So the business has had to adapt right across all places to manage with that.
If you were to just reflect on that, would you put it down to as a successful sort of change overall? How would you see that?
Yeah, so the inflation, obviously, I think we reacted to it at the right time.
Yeah.
Throughout each of the processes, and it was successful. We got the results that we went out to achieve.
Brilliant.
And the new business, there's always teething problems. We grow in business, and we've worked through that. But I think we've come out the other end now, and we're actually at a stable place with it. So yeah, there's been key learnings. Even though we've made certain products for such a long time, there's still been key learnings in the short period of time that we were going through it. So
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Justin, for that. Brilliant. Anybody else? Yes, Kenny.
The biggest change we've had is probably just been the last year. Our founder and CEO retired. So we all had to kind of step into new roles, kind of bigger roles in the business, and that's kind of led to quite a lot of changes. So now I'm acting CEO. There's been a change in the business plan. We've got a new business plan for the next 5 years, which includes bringing new products out, working with new suppliers, going into new markets, bringing digital marketing, which we used to outsource to an agency, bringing that back in-house, and the pandemic overhauling our internal processes and systems and everything.
Brilliant, brilliant.
And it's the foundations to be successful at everything we want to do.
Fantastic. I think that's really good that you said you sort of stepped into the shoes, because I think the sort of culture changes and things, I think something you could reflect on as we sort of go on with the session. Cheers for that. Anybody else?
I don't mind
Yes,
giving
Angela.
us a bit of change. Not long after I had joined the company, our invoice system actually got hacked, and thankfully there was no money financially had been released, but whenever raised the awareness to it, very, very sophisticated actually from the website, looked like us. So what we did was we reached out to a consultant for tightening up our systems and cyber security. So we're still actually working with this consultant just now in the hope that we can do our cyber safe accreditation soon as well. But we really did have an overhaul in all of our systems that way.
Yeah, I think those sort of forced changes sort of improves your systems at the most sort of unlikely situation and unexpected situations. So that's a really good one as well.
Yeah.
We can take one more if that's all right, just because of time, if that's okay.
Hi. We're a relatively new business and we started tea tasting and selling tea, but we thought we need to expand the knowledge that people have that we exist. So we went down the 5 p.m. Edison route with vouchers. We thought for afternoon teas weren't in the equation when we started all this, but we sort of fell into that. And we thought over the 3 months we were doing it, we'd sell maybe 30, 40 or something like that. We ended up selling about 100. So we've had to reassess how we do afternoon teas. We used to buy in quite a bit of stuff from local producers, but we felt we had to start doing our own things to cut the cost down, etc. And it's been very, very successful, which was really the main thing of it all.
Brilliant, brilliant. Cheers, Bill. Thank you very much. So those are some really fantastic examples. I'm sure there are a couple more things you could reflect on as you sort of go along. I'm just moving forward because of the time concern, if that's all right. So right. So I mean, I think we get a feel for how some of those sort of changes, especially with your experiences, do come into the equation. But then not to put things on a sort of a negative tone, but then 70% of innovation and changes or changing projects fail to meet their target benefits on time. Now, that's something that we do have to keep in mind. I mean, as much as change is something that we require in the organizations, most of the time, changes do have its own challenges, hence why we are trying to address this from a few perspectives, so that we can give you a more of a comprehensive overview in terms of how changes should happen. So the good thing here is, because all of you are coming from experience, some of the sort of technical things that we're putting forward here would sit very nicely with some of the actual changes that you've gone through. So there's a lot of reflection that we can do as we sort of proceed with the session. Now, I think this is something quite interesting that we sort of like to put forward. So now, one of the things that we need to understand as we think of change, especially from our business perspective. So if we take our current business model, whatever industry it is, I think we need to understand that changes cannot happen overnight. I mean, changes do happen in a way where things do need to change gradually. We need to take things step by step. And it's extremely important that we are able to identify whether it's our tea business, whether we are in construction, how we could really break down some of those changes in a way where we could put things gradually, where people are able to absorb some of the changes during their job while they continue their present job, and then it has to feel like a natural progression. Because if you are going to move from point A to point C straight away, that might leave people with a gap, which can lead to some of the problems later on in the process. So that's the basic idea, where we say you move from step by step to your end goal as you go along. Now, if we are to put this into a bit of a practice mode, I think this would be a better way to put it. So again, first of all, you need to reflect, you need to think about your business model, what it is right now. So we need to first understand quite well where you stand as a business. So the present context, what you exactly do, why you are in this context, what needs to be changed, and how you are exactly going to execute. That is what you need to do. So once that planning process is done, you could then move on to the action stages, where you are then setting those targets to achieve those things. And then obviously the reflection could come in the process as we go along. So that is where we would then lead to what we call the improved business model 1. And we don't stop there, do we? We still keep on sort of reiterating the process And then throughout the process, I think it's very important that we not only plan and do, but then review. I think most businesses, I think that's something we almost oversee. I mean, it's very interesting to do all the planning and to execute changes, but I think it's as equal importance needs to be given to how you really review some of those changes. How do you learn from some of the mistakes that you did? Now, for example, if you did certain changes during the business model process one, for example, if certain things didn't work, most likely those things that didn't work need to be taken into the equation and then applied to the model two. So that's something that we can really keep in our mind as you go along. Folks, is this okay? Is this too complicated for you to understand, or are we okay with this? Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward, although the arrows and the sort of elaborate diagram looks a bit complicated. I think it's a very simple way of understanding things. So the key message with this is, again, you still need to change. Yeah, I mean, obviously the change is happening, but it's just about understanding how we could really break down the changes in a way where people are able to understand. So the leadership really needs to know that as much as you have this holistic picture of things, I mean, you might have the drone shot of how the changes are supposed to happen, but when it comes to the employees, you need to really break it down. I think that's where your skill and your experience needs to come into the equation as we go along. So let's look at something a bit more sort of technical to understand. Now, this is what we sort of look at in terms of Kotler's 8 steps towards change. Now, again, some of these things you might be quite familiar, but where do we start? First of all, we need to create a sense of urgency. Now, what does this mean? Now, as a leader, if you're trying to push towards change, I think it's extremely important that you create a buzz in the organization. I mean, you need to first be understanding this and this urgency, whether it's to do with the market changing. Now, for example, with the pandemic coming in, the shift towards e-commerce was an urgent concern. I mean, if you're not switching into e-commerce, if you're not really changing the way you were dealing with your customers, I mean, you were left out of the market. So there is an urgency naturally, but certain situations, urgencies can happen through your market research. You understand your customers changing. You need to create this importance and sort of a priority within the organization to start things off. Now, once this is done, then you have to sort of create teams within the organization who are sort of championing some of these changes. So that's where this powerful coalition comes in. You're championing changes inside the organization. People are talking about why change is important. So there's a clear-cut message in the organization that, look here, something needs to change here if we are to succeed. And that's where the leadership comes into the equation. So then you have people who would be then pushing towards change, people who want to sort of champion some of those ideas, some of these visions forward. Now, how can we do that? How can we push towards changes? I mean, the only way we can push towards some of these changes is that, first of all, we have people who are championing change. Yes, we have people who are championing change, but also it's about communicating change. Now, if I was to just take example, I think what Kenny said about how you were able to sort of step into the shoes of the CEO. I mean, as much as you take on this role, Kenny, I mean, you would agree that it's extremely important that you put forward some of your thoughts, isn't it? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think when you come in, there's a kind of, I've worked for the business for 14 years. So obviously I've had things I've wanted to do for years and years, but it's never been my place to kind of make that decision. So I think create urgency is obviously we want to change the business. We want to do better than we've done before. So yeah, you just kind of say that we need to rethink the way that we've been doing things and get the team on board and kind of involve them in it as much as possible, because I think that's the most important thing, is to get their backing, is to involve them as much as you can.
100%, very good. Yeah, so I mean, with that in mind, obviously you are not going to find it an easy task. Obviously coming, whether it's new leaders who are coming into the organization, whether it is just the management who are coming into the organization, you are going to face a lot of sort of restrictions. You're going to face a lot of, I would say, obstacles, resistance within the organization as well. Now, when we say removing obstacles, it doesn't mean that you're obviously simply going to fire every single person who's going to come against you, but it's simply about understanding their perspectives, where they come from, whether it's through experience, whether it's through the job roles, and then sort of finding sort of a better solution in addressing those issues. And hence, with that, they are able to then sort of fall in line with some of the changes that you're bringing in. And when you also do that, it's also extremely important for you to understand that some of the people, again, as I bring this example, obviously the senior management, the leaders will see the final output. They're able to see the full picture. But when it comes to employees, whether it's the divisions, whether it's individual tasks, it's very difficult for them to see why this change is important, what this change really means for them. So that's where I think the team leaders, or in a small business, again, the leadership themselves need to really communicate very clearly what change really means for you in the organization, whether it's the marketing team, whether it's the supply chain, what that really means for you in terms of change. And then building on this, and then finally, obviously, creating overall sort of picture and a culture within the organization, saying that this is something that we need to really embrace as an organization. So I think the process with Kotler's 8 steps towards change is quite strong. I think it can be universal, although this is a concept that has been there for a while. I think especially it's very important this urgency is created, because if there's no importance, if nobody's really feeling there is a need for change, I think it'll be very difficult for you to continue the momentum, especially during the middle stages when you start facing a lot of obstacles and resistance towards change in the organization. So I think that should be okay. Any questions with this, guys? Is this all right for you? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got one question. If that's okay.
Yes.
In your experience, is change top down, or have you ever witnessed bottom up change? Because this assumes top down change.
Correct.
It's very interesting hearing Kenny's comment about you had lots of things he wanted to do but couldn't do them. So you know, what's your? Do you have any experience of bottom up?
Yeah, I mean, so I run a business, again, not in Scotland. I'm originally from Sri Lanka, but we run a business in Sri Lanka where we do tea, gems, and a few other things. So one of the things we work with the traditional handicraft sector in the industry. So one of the things that we realized was that we needed to sort of really modify some of those traditional handicraft items to fit into the more sort of the modern marketplace. And in that situation, we had to really work with artisans. So it was not really the top management was able to drive those changes, because it was actually the people who are doing those crafts were able to really understand how some of those changes were able to be brought into the table, because they are the technicians or the artisans who are working with that. So in that situation, I would say it's a bit of a bottom-up kind of approach in that sense. But then still, I think the key message with Kotler's, I would say, Gordon and Justin, is that you still need to, yes, it looks like a more top-down sort of approach, but this urgency, I think, still needs to come, whether it's a top-down or a bottom-up approach. I think, first of all, you need to create that space in the organization that this is the time for change. I think that's the key message here. I think the sort of vision for change, communicating the vision, all that could sort of change around a little bit based on how we run the process. But the urgency and the vibe, I would use that word, inside the organization, that change needs to happen, needs to be felt throughout the organization. I hope that sort of gives you some kind of an answer for that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So let's move down. So that's the sort of first step that we sort of look at. And then the sort of second understanding is where we bring in the sort of the forces, the driving forces and the restraining forces in terms of the next technical analysis. So here, again, what we're trying to understand is that as much as we are saying, yes, changes are to happen, again, this is something to do with something like this, the removing obstacles section. Change is important, but we need to understand what are the things that are helping us change, what are the things that are sort of stopping us making some of those changes. I think this is extremely important, because as much as from the Kotler's understanding that we put these into little boxes, I think this removing obstacles section is being explained quite well when it comes to the sort of restraining and the driving forces model that we're trying to explain here. Now, let's look at sort of a real life example just to make our life a little easier. Now, in this case, so we are looking at sort of a specialist training in leadership sort of company. Again, now if in this situation, so obviously there is change that is being proposed in the organization. So that's very clear. Now, what are we trying to understand? So first of all, let's try to look at what are the positive factors which are driving change here. Again, okay, so what do we have? We have exceptionally good client feedback, which is saying, okay, certain things are positive. Commercial imperative to grow. So market potential, the market says there is a requirement for change, whether it's due to customer changes in preferences, market needs, yes, it's there. There is a client services director who has a strong ambition for change. Again, as we go back to our initial model, so clearly, maybe it's something to do with having a vision for change, and there's somebody in the organization or senior management who is pushing towards change. So that's the sort of left side of the equation. Now, in this organization, we also have an equal amount of restraining forces which are not really supportive. Now, what is that? So first of all, we've got two business owners who have two different growth strategies. Now, can somebody tell me what does that really mean? Now, how does that really fit in? Did you see that as a problem in the organization? Any thoughts? Has that ever happened?
I'd say it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you kind of need a consensus between the owners of the business, because there's only one path to growth, really. Because you can't focus on two different ones, because they're just going to clash somewhere down the line.
Exactly. Yeah, very good. I mean, within the organization, employees can have their own sort of views. I mean, that's perfectly fine. But then when it comes to the owners who are obviously driving, especially SMEs, it'll be very difficult if you're going to have two business owners sort of tearing apart in that sense to start things off. And obviously, then we've got something quite obvious in most situations where organizations go through, the staff feeling fearful. Now, in this case, it's because they're worried that they'll be overloaded with tasks. But again, this is a universal situation with change. Again, people feeling fearful, whether it's for their jobs, whether it's for the skill transfer, etc. But in this situation, we are looking at things of workload being overloaded. And then again, another problem this organization faces is that the market position was ill-defined. Now, what does that mean? Market position feeling ill-defined means that the organization is in a situation where they really don't understand why the change is important and where do they stand in the organization. How are they going to shift into a new market is something that they don't really see very clearly. So based on this, let's look at the issue in a bit of a broader sense. If we are to just scroll through this, just take 2 minutes to just absorb this first of all. Yeah, so we have obviously the restraining forces of the driving force, the driving and the restraining forces here. Now, first of all, in terms of the supporting factors, obviously exceptionally good client feedback is there, but then one of the things that we find is that there was little growth potential from existing clients. So that's a concern. Although there is a need in the marketplace for growth, the urgency created more panic than focus. Now, that's something we also need to understand. I mean, yes, if there is interest to growth, that's perfect. But then if the urgency is simply creating panic, or we need to do something in the marketplace to capture that, that's not really sustainable, because we won't be able to really build on something for the longer term. Now, again, the director having a lot of ambition for change for something that we saw, but then it was simply the director's ambition. So the others, the peers, were not really feeling some of the changes. So that's also quite problematic, because again, it's more of an isolated situation in this scenario. Now, if you were to look at some of the, obviously the restraining forces, yes, when you have two owners having two different paths, clearly it was a problem, as sort of Kenny mentioned, staff clearly receiving mixed signals, which is not really great for their growth. When employees feel fearful in terms of the workload, again, there can be frustrations, mental agony, all those kind of problems can cause quite a few concerns in the organization. And finally, when the market position is also not very well defined, then also we have a problem as to understanding what kind of product that we're doing, whether we are doing our strategies correctly. So it sort of boils down to some of the fundamental issues that we are facing. So clearly in this situation, what we can see is that the restraints or the changes in the organization are problematic, or the factors which are pulling down the change is sort of overloading the actual need for positive change. So in this situation, we can end up in the organization where changes are suggested, but unfortunately, because the restraining forces are overweighing the driving forces, the changes might not really work through. Hence, we go back to our statistics, which says 70% of the changes sometimes will not really lead to any positive changes. Guys, are we clear with this? Any questions so far? So these are the two sort of key technical sort of pointers that we want to cover. Any reflections on this? Have you all used something similar in your organization? I know that this is quite technical, but have you all ever thought about sort of what really supports change in the organization, what really doesn't support? Any thoughts on that? Anyone wants to share any ideas?
The only comment I think personally is a beautiful little model. I mean, it's very, very simplistic, and its layout and everything. But one thing we don't do, I know, in our own organisation, is look at it in this way. But we just have frustrated people that we see, and think, how did you get there? And I suppose that's maybe the way in lots of organisations, that by actually putting it down in this very clean format, it really gives you a great focus as to where you're maybe going to hit a brick wall, or where potentially things could be managed differently to get a better outcome. I mean, this is a classic example. We actually had this. We had a very ambitious operations director, and amongst others who weren't ambitious, she did leave very quickly. So it's almost a direct reflection of something that actually happened, and not so long ago in our organisation. And we never looked at it in this way, no. But it's a lovely model, very straightforward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gordon and Justin, for sharing those thoughts. So I hope this is sort of clear for us. So sort of move on. So this is basically section 1 that we just covered in terms of how changes are to happen. And I would like to obviously go into section 2 now to move on in terms of how we can take people with us for change. I think that's extremely important. Now, getting people on board is not usually the easiest thing. Some people might say that personally, when I've spoken to people about how you really bring about change, some people say it's just they've got this charisma in them where people just follow you. But then I think it's important that we are able to at least identify a few universal ways in which we can get people on board, because it's extremely important that our ideas are a reflection within our employees as we go along in the process. So let's see how people generally hold up an idea. I mean, there are so many ways in which people look at something. They can take it or they could leave it, but then there are so many different ways. People ignore things, people just laugh things off, sort of talk about the cost, think they can find a better solution. I'm not going to go through every single thing, but yes, I mean this is quite
I do.
This is quite usual. Again, it might really boil down to personalities as well. I mean, some people just don't like to take an idea. They'll have their own sort of, I mean, they'll take the idea, but they'll have their own spin onto it and then sort of put it forward. So again, it's quite interesting that you have to sort of go through certain things. But this is normal. We need to understand the important thing here is that, I mean, as much as we are proposing changes, you equally need to acknowledge the fact that in this case, according to Darwin, at least there are 22 different ways in which people would really take this idea up in themselves. So that's something as leaders, you'll need to really keep a track of and acknowledge as well. Now, why is this? Why do people have so many different reasons? I mean, it can come to, yes, as I said, personality, but let's just dissect this a little bit more. People simply find change scary. Yeah, I mean, if you speak to a lot of people, I mean, that's something quite natural for humans anyways. I mean, we are species that are quite comfortable in our own spaces. We are quite comfortable with our own routines. And we don't really like changes. I mean, at least we take time to adjust to some of those changes. Yeah, so people in organizational context might not really see the big picture, why change is really coming towards them. They also have, again, because when you don't see that big picture or the final hurdle or in terms of why change is coming and what change is really going to happen, you might think those solutions are not going to really work. So that's also something we need to acknowledge. It also will have a personal cost to them. That's why I say, again, some of those changes, especially with things like AI coming into the equation, if you feel like you're going to lose a job, if you feel like some of your skills are going to be redundant personally, that can create more of a negative mind frame as well. Again, simply cost reward factor both can be covered in that way as well. They're afraid, as I said, they're also worried about how much control you might have in the organization. Yeah. And find different solutions or just not be willing to acknowledge those changes. So as much as we've sort of put this in a very simple layout, yeah, we always like to make things a bit more elaborate. So I'm just going to show you something a bit more elaborate, but again, I think it's a simple model to understand. So again, just have a look at this first of all. So where do we start? So stage one is where we start. So what is that? So when change is initially brought into the equation, you have different feelings. People feel the denial, yeah, they're not happening. People are shocked. Sort of, there's a lot of, I would say, low energy when change is being proposed, proposed at least. So that's what we call an ending sort of feeling. And then once that sort of feeling is sort of changed or transitioned, we get to a stage where, yes, we slowly are able to accept, yes, change is happening. I mean, it's something that we cannot avoid or run away. I mean, with time, we understand this. And then we get to a point where, okay, we think like, okay, fine, seems like this is going to be here to stay. Why not at least we try something? You start experimenting, step into the water, just feel how things are. Without even knowing, you might realize some of those changes are quite positive for you. You take those things on board and then you start engaging as you go along. So again, it's a slow process. Anyone wants to share any thoughts here? Did you feel the same sort of step-by-step approach, or was there a straightaway jump into an engagement or an acceptance that change was inevitable? Any thoughts here, guys?
This is probably more a personal one for me, but
right,
5 years ago, I decided to join Bells as a company, and my previous employer, I was with them for 17.5 years. So it was a big step change even doing that. And I openly struggle with change, but I can actually relate to that whole journey and it's probably taken a good 4 years to carry out that journey, I'll be honest with you.
Oh, you're still in shock.
I'm still in shock. I'm still at the first stage of it, but it's something I can relate to very well in terms of taking the dip and then picking up. And if it wasn't for the man on my left, I'd have probably struggled a lot more. But Gordon is
you'd have moved forward a lot quicker.
Yeah. Gordon's me on. You can tell by that relationship that he just keeps me going. So yeah, for me personally, I can feel every step of that in the journey that I've taken and the job move that I made. So yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Any more thoughts? Anybody else?
A headbutting for me almost mentally between
the
other model, which is create urgency, and then shock, which comes at the beginning. So you've created this urgency, which I suspect is to create some form of excitement and energy and movement and all that, but you're ramming it against people going into shock. and it just kind of goes, whoa, what are we heading for here? I don't know how to square that mentally, to be honest with you. I have no idea how to do that, but it seems a bit juxtaposition.
No, that's a brilliant one. No, so the thing is, I think with the sort of urgency, what we're trying to do is we are not trying to put people into a panic attack. I think that's the thing to understand.
I know.
Urgency comes with sort of a process where you understand, okay, the market is changing. I mean, urgency could also simply mean the fact that people are not even aware what's even happening outside the organization. So it's a sort of a process where we could say it's a bit subjective as well, based on what industry, what area you are in. But yes, I think people going into shock, I think if that doesn't happen, it's a surprise, I would say. At least there'll be a few people who find it a little difficult to really understand that. But I think you make a fair point. I think there's no denial that people will still go into shock, and you have something in mind, a contingency ready for that.
Yeah.
Good.
Understandable.
Yes. Fantastic. So I hope that's clear for us in that stage as we process. Now, as much as we like to put things into a lot of tables and graphs and things like that, I think for you, especially since people who come from the industry, I think the practical examples or the practical steps is where things do make a bit more sense, I would imagine, as much as we like to use some of these models. So let's look at some of the practical ways in which we can help people to move through the transition curve, as we like to say. So first of all, I think going back to Gordon and Justin, yes, if people are going through shock or people are finding it difficult to understand, identify those groups, first of all. Identify the groups maybe who you think are going to be the most vulnerable, who will be finding it a little difficult to sort of manage the process, and then you are able to sort of convince them, work with them throughout the change. So if those people can be convinced, I think I'm pretty sure the rest of them are able to sort of slowly fall into place as well. Also, just have an open conversation. I think it's very important, as much as you are trying to push changes, which you can clearly see it's a positive change. That's why you're bringing the change into the organization in the first place. But it's very important that you speak to individuals and understand their side of the story as well. I mean, if you've got people who are not really finding it difficult to, finding it easy to change skills, you need to tell them. Again, personal experience, again, when I work with some of these artisans back in Sri Lanka, some of the things that they say, look here, yes, we want to bring some of these new changes, but they don't have the skill set, or they don't have the technical know-how to do some of those changes. So we cannot just simply leave that to them. You need to speak to them, identify why it's a problem, then work with them for that change as well. And yeah, so that's where I think the engagement needs to happen throughout the process as we go along, and be clear why change is needed. Sometimes people lose vision. I mean, people know, okay, this change is coming, but then for some reason throughout the process, people might forget why this is even happening in the first place. So you need to communicate the message very clearly. And also have, I think, coming back to this question about a top-down or a bottom-up approach, I think this next point tries to address this a bit better. Openly discuss about how they could contribute to change. I think it's very important. I think that's where speaking to people who are doing those respective jobs becomes important. Now, I don't know whether you have any personal experience with that, with some of the changes. When you bring changes, they bring in some of their own suggestions, and you should be able to welcome some of those changes throughout the process. I think it helps in two ways. I would think personally, one thing is that obviously you are able to have a better ground level understanding why changes, how changes can happen. Secondly, you are really empowering those people because they feel like their decisions are being taken into the equation as well. So you're sort of, it's a win-win situation in that sense as well. So other things obviously come into the equation with this, things like active listening, making sure they are comforted, acknowledging their feelings, both positive and negative, and then keeping this support going throughout the process. So I think this section is quite easy to follow, but the key message, if I was to just summarize this entire slide, is that first of all, work with people who you think are the most vulnerable, number one. Secondly, help them out in the process, listen to their side of the story, and then give that support as much as possible through the transition. I think that's something that we have to really work our way towards it. Any questions up to now, guys? Anything that you need to clarify? Please do let me know if the pace is okay. I'm not sure whether I'm rushing through things too much as well. Just want to just check with that as well. Any questions so far? Any concerns that you have? We are not too far away from a break as well, so just to keep you, if you're guessing on that as well. Yes, good. Right. So obviously the workbook is there for you. I mean, the template is there again in the worksheet that you'll be working through the transition curve. So we are going to leave that for you during the worksheet that we are going to cover. And now, since the topic was basically about how to sort of bring people on board, or how we can bring people with us for change, it's extremely important to understand that we are dealing with people who have thoughts and feelings. I think that's something that we need to acknowledge. And first of all, we need to start thinking differently. Again, that's something important. If we don't really reflect a need for change, I don't think it'll be very easy for us to convince other people to come on this change or come on this journey. So it's very important that you first set a good example as a leader in that sense. And when you start feeling differently, it can also change things. Again, if people are comfortable with changes, they might find new experiences. They might even find out things that they never knew about themselves when they are open-minded, when they're open to some of those changes as we go along. And this is where we say people, if you are able to really move people, not just physically, but also their thought process in this setup, I think a lot of things are going to work towards you. Now, this process entirely would require a lot of time and thought, because that's where I think the leaders, especially in the organization, the top management, would need to really consider what individual people's job roles are and how you could really bring some of those changes. Now, if I was to use, again, a personal experience, when we bring changes, especially when we are working with international clients, one of the things that we do with artisans who are working in rural cottages or in cottage industries, we communicate to them at a different level. We communicate to them at a level where we tell them that you have to feel as if you are showcasing some of your talents to the global market. And that just gives them this feel and urge to that some of their work is being processed. But when it comes to, let's say, the retail side of things, we are then motivating people to say that we are attracting a better audience. We are able to really show something unique with our products that maybe our competitors are not able to really get to the market. So again, the sort of messages that you're really putting forward to different groups of people or the stakeholders in the organization would also be different. If you are able to really identify that, you'll be able to then really communicate some of those changes, especially in terms of the thoughts and feelings, how people really feel about those changes, why they need to really come on board with these changes quite well. So I think we've sort of gone through two sections. I think I know that we said we are going to go for a break at, was it 2 o'clock, Jane? But I think we could.
If you feel this is a good point for it, then
yes, yes. Yeah. So before we jump into section 3, I think we deserve a bit of a break. I think there's a lot of information that we did process, so maybe we do need a little bit of a coffee break, if that's all right. So Jane, you suggest, Angela, was it 10 minutes that we take?
10 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll be back by
5 past.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
See you then. I wanted to actually. There's one video that I wanted to share just before we go on to section 3. So this is about sort of Heart of Change, The Heart of Change by Kotler. So I'm just going to play this for you. I'm just going to share the screen. I hope the sound works for you all as well. Let's see.
Here's a tip, very simple. Then I'll explain why it's so important, at least in my opinion. In a change process of any kind, if it's significant, you have to, in the words of somebody a long time ago, win over the hearts and the minds of people. And I wonder sometimes if we would simply let that little phrase ring in our heads all the time, win over hearts and minds, win over hearts and minds. If that little change in what's going on in our brains wouldn't make a huge difference in how we deal with people during a change process and the results we get. Now, let me back up. When we studied successful change projects of any kind, again, reorganizations, cultural change, new strategy implementations, doesn't matter what the content is. What we found is that small percentage that were particularly effective, they really did work much more than average, not just on trying to get people to think differently, which in turn would change their behavior, but to get people to feel differently, which in turn would change their behavior. In a typical change effort that I've seen over the years, if you could somehow do an analysis on those dimensions, the effort to change thinking, the effort to change feeling, I wouldn't be surprised if on average you found it was 90-10 or at best 80-20, with the 90 and the 80 being on the think part. I once did an analysis in response to a interviewer about MBA programs, and the one that I know the best, and it's even more frightening. About 95% of the program is a work on the mind, change your thinking, and maybe 5% is on a work on the feelings to change your behavior. They learn about, they've been taught about, they've been role modeled about the thinking part. And more, of course, that's what's coming into our organizations, people trained that way. So what? If you go back and study the way the brain has been constructed, if you talk to neurologists, what they tell you is that for whatever reasons, historically, you've got two pieces, this more emotional piece and this thinking piece. And the more emotional piece has a longer history than the thinking side. And it is more tightly connected in a funny way to those nerves that change and regulate our behavior. And if you want to make somebody change to a significant degree, not just a small degree, that's the more powerful lever. And in the most successful cases of change that we've studied, and you do that little percentage comparison, it's more like they work 60% on the heart side and 40% on the mind side. It's not 80-20, but it's not even 50-50. How do they do it? Hundreds of ways. I can't think of any, somebody says to me. No, you can. It's natural. That's the way you're built. You just let it come out. There are thousands of ways that you can create experiences. So much role modeling is just that. It's not, people aren't taking notes. He did such and such. There's a direct kind of emotion to emotion connection that helps you learn something, changes your feelings about something, and changes your behavior. There are hundreds of ways that you can create experiences, that you can feed even data in a way that doesn't just hit the thinking part, but the feeling part. Get the behavior change, make the overall change process work. Go back to the tip. In your little brain, the more that you can have that voice reminding you, you got to win over the hearts and minds, the better it'll work out.
So I think that's a very nice way to put it. Keep on reminding yourself, yeah, that change needs to happen. I think that's very good. It's a very simplistic way as well, not to complicate things too much as well. So that's from Kotler himself. And now we like to sort of move into section 3, which is on achieving an engaged workforce. So we moved from obviously introducing change, how to bring people on board towards change, and now we are looking at how to really create an active sort of or engaged workforce. Now, it's always a question that people ask, what makes a great place to work? I mean, there can be so many different things. Anyone wants to say a few things? What do you think a great workplace should have? Any thoughts, personal experiences? Obviously, you can be voices for your own organizations in this case as well. Any thoughts? Anybody likes to give?
Transparency.
Transparency, yeah. It's a good place to start. Yeah, very good.
Working with a good team.
Yes, Jane, yes, that's right.
Aligned values.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, there are so many different ways. If you look at, I mean, globally, I mean, obviously places like Google, Apple always sort of champion some of those changes. But let's look at what makes good places to work. So this is coming from great places to work in terms of the top 10 qualities. So things such as benefits tailored to employees' needs and wants. So there's customized benefits. People can clearly see, being in the organization, what kind of benefits, what kind of rewards that they can get. People are being recognized. So I think that also comes down to the authenticity of the leadership as well. They're being appreciated even for the small tasks that they do in the organization. There's a lot of inclusivity, diversity. So having people from different backgrounds, people from different walks of life coming in builds, again, a very strong foundation for different perspectives to come into the equation. There's also things kept in a very fun and engaging way, not too serious in certain ways. You know, there's always room for people to build and bond as well. The employment branding attracts top and retains top talent. So again, the organization has a sort of a habit of keeping good people in-house, not letting them leave. Again, the other thing also that we need to understand is that how some of those senior level management, senior level understandings are being communicated to the organization at different levels. So again, embedding strategy into the different outputs of the organization is also key. People have to also see a pathway for growth. I think that's extremely important. I mean, if you're existing in an organization, you should be able to see yourself in the next 5 years where you're going to land in the organization in terms of promotions, in terms of career development as well. And again, there's also value being given for people's well-being, people's health, being taken care of. Again, values, behaviors at all levels. It doesn't have to be only senior level. So that's where, again, the more sort of balanced outlook needs to come into the equation. And that can also be connected to the fact that you need to have clear communication channels, getting people's voices, people's opinions at all times, so that everyone feels valued, everyone feels like they're part of a community in the organization space. So I think this sort of pretty much captures some of the more essential ones that helps people to grow towards. I'm sure that you might have experienced some of these things in the organization. We clearly have gone through some of them personally as well. So that's a good place to start. So we have first identified some of the qualities that makes people successful, or certain organizations or certain workplaces successful. And now let's sort of step outside this and start looking at from the very beginning, why is it important for us to understand this topic of employee engagement? I mean, the whole point of talking about good workplaces is because in these good workplaces, people feel happy in what they do. So if people are happy, that means that they're engaging, that they are going to take more, that they're going to take a larger responsibility in the tasks that they're given. So why is this important? Now, if being positively presented during the performance of work by willingly contributing to intellectual effort, experiencing positive emotions and meaningful connections to others. So that's what we mean by employee engagement, according to the fact sheet. So again, if we were to break this down, you can clearly see that how your skills and your intellect is being contributed to the organization. in your capacity. Now, again, if I was to use my example, artisans who are doing crafts, they can clearly see that their craftsmanship is being put into the equation to create certain products. And it creates a positive sort of emotion in you. Why? Because obviously the management acknowledges the changes, people appreciate what you're doing, and that sort of, it almost sort of feeds on itself, I would say, as we go along. And what does that mean? If you feel this energy, if you feel this buzz in the organization that you are being appreciated, that you are being treated nicely, you want to do more. You feel like you can do so much more in the organization. And that just gives and opens up a completely different perspective, because you are trying to be better every single day. You're trying to be better. That means you're going to be innovative. You're going to be creative. You want to be proactive, be on top of your game. So it just creates, I would say, sort of a very interesting mindset in the organization. Now, has that ever happened to you? Now, for example, I just wanted to ask this question now. From your personal experiences, has there been a situation where you have suddenly felt that you can do much better if you are being appreciated in the organization? Any thoughts on that, guys? Do you feel that that's something that happens gradually, or does that just happen overnight? Like you flip a switch and suddenly, boom, you feel like you can do so much better. Anyone wants to share any thoughts with that? Any ideas?
Angela, you might want to share about the apprentice that you had, the young person that you had that left despite all that you were doing for them.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as Zuru was talking. We obviously being a construction company and having a background in teaching, I see obviously a big need for skills are needed. They're really needed in the construction industry, and we're trying to attract young talent to come into play in our company at the minute. And ways we did that was through reaching out to the Tigers group, who work with kids who maybe school wasn't for them. They're more active in their learning approaches. So anyway, cut a long story short, we did have this apprentice who was in his second year at South Lanarkshire College, and we really did bend over backwards for him. He recently turned 18 and he lives with his gran. His gran's raised him, and he was such a great worker, was really attentive, went to college, was learning lots. Barry, my husband, who's the director, couldn't speak highly enough of him. But unfortunately, in the financial times that we're in at the minute, once he turned 18, whatever bursary he was getting from the college stopped, which his gran was taking. And he was in a position where his gran wanted his wage. He's 18, he doesn't want to give his wage over. And he has just decided that he's quitting being a joiner, doesn't want to do joinery, and he's going to join the army. So when my husband said, well, it's your decision, that's your decision, you make these, you can't, sure, you've only got another couple of years to go and then you'll have this qualification, you can take it anywhere. But he decided no. So Barry said, why don't you just stay with us then? If you've got this interview down south with the army in 4 months, why don't you stay with us to save up? And he said, no, I can get more working in KFC per hour to save up before I go. So as much as we were disappointed, but not taking it personally, because we know that we've tried. Again, Barry did say, well, why don't we try and match this pay for him? But then why is that that's not fair then on the rest of the employers that we've got who have went to do their college and are a bit more experienced. So some you win, some you lose.
No, that's thank you, Angela. I mean that's a really interesting one, because again, as much as an employer, you want to spend and you want to invest on employees who you can see a future clearly in the organization and even for themselves in the long run. But unfortunately, this does happen. So, but yeah, I think it's a big loss, both, I mean, for both parties in that sense, because they don't really see the long-term potential. They just go for the, obviously, the financial incentive on a short-term basis, as well as an employer, you've invested your time and effort, and yes, that does happen. So yeah, I mean, that's a tough one in that way. Good, thank you very much. Right, so let's move on. So we were sort of starting to get a feel for, obviously, employee engagement, how it is important. And now let's look at a few enablers, what just activates engagement in the organization. First of all, strategic narrative. So again, what does that mean? In the organization, the leadership is able to really clearly communicate how the strategy is being sort of processed in the organization and how it is being communicated throughout the organization to its employees. Now, this means that things have to be sort of simplified in a certain way. Again, if I was to use one of my personal examples, so when we decided as a company we wanted to create more, we would say, fusion products, which are sort of aligning with some of the traditional as well as international tastes and preferences, we needed to really break it down into employees. For example, artisans didn't really understand what that meant. So obviously we had to show them certain designs, certain patterns, especially things like the minimalistic kind of designs and patterns are popular in the European markets, as opposed to, let's say, in the South Asian markets where the products are very colorful. So those kind of things, we sort of introduce those changes to people in a certain way. You need to also have engaging managers. So again, your managers are going to be your champions, especially managers or team leaders who are able to really take the big message or the sort of the more, I would say, the overall picture and break it down into more smaller targets, which can be communicated to the teams as we go along. And throughout the process, you still need to have employees' voice being heard. Obviously, that's where especially managers would play a bigger role here, managers and the employees, where information can be passed on, certain changes, certain preferences, things that can be problems that can be resolved and communicated, so that changes are made in a way where some of those issues are being addressed. And everything needs to be done in a way where integrity and I think transparency, I think this is what we discussed at the very beginning as well. I think Kenny also mentioned we just need to make sure things are kept very straightforward. There's no gap between the information that is being passed on or communicated at any level, so that people feel like things are genuine and authentic throughout the process. So I think this is quite easy and straightforward for us to understand. Any questions with this, guys? Yeah, we okay? Yeah, pretty straightforward. Now, now moving from the enablers of engagement, now don't worry too much about the titles, because I know it can be a little confusing when you have so many different titles, but we are simply trying to work our way into what really makes engagement happen in the organization. We are simply trying to dissect engagement. Now, employee engagement facets. Now, how does engagement really comes through? So Hay Group model by Armstrong 2006 proposed these sort of 6 areas in which engagement sort of can occur and can sort of bring about. And if people are able to see these things in the organization, they're definitely going to be championing towards change. So first of all, inspirational values. So that means obviously the reputation of the organization, how strong the organization stands for its values and culture, quality of the leaders, risk sharing, recognition, communication. So these are sort of value systems people first look in the organization. If you have these communicated very clearly, regardless of what stage you are in the organization, people are going to have a higher value or have a higher self-esteem or value. They'll place a higher value in terms of what you're really saying and how serious you are. Then we get to things of quality of work. So that's where people feel the organization providing that freedom, providing that opportunity for you to really engage in things. There's a balance, work-life balance in the organization, so the quality is remained. And we also get into things like enabling environment. So again, here we speak about things such as opportunities for promotion, the kind of tools and equipment. I think that's very important, especially for example, things like when we are lecturing, for example, when we have the right equipment to teaching classes. Again, if you're doing certain technical jobs, you need to have that space given to you. And also the safety and personal security, I think with things like construction, I think that there are really concerns such as that. And obvious things such as, I think, tangible rewards. I think that's the example even Angela suggested. I mean, competitive pay. I mean, if people just values that over maybe other things, but also other things such as recognition, sort of incentive, high performance, benefits, all that do matter. But again, I think it's quite subjective. Certain people obviously value some of this over maybe a longer term progress in the organization. So I think it's a bit of a trick one to really look at in that way. Work-life balance we discussed, and again, future growth opportunities. So I think this sort of gives us a sort of a balanced picture. I mean, if we were to pick one or the other, I think it will be quite difficult, because I think it's a combination of few things. People look into things, but as I said, there are situations where people obviously would go for tangible rewards, a competitive pay over future growth potential based on their financial circumstances or personal reasons. So that's something that we can keep in our mind. Now, as obviously leaders of organizations, is this something that you all look into now? I mean, I'm curious, just because Angela sort of brought this up, I'm just curious, do you all proactively, I mean, does anyone want to share, do you proactively look at ways in which engagement is being built in the organization? Do you do any kind of proactive research into this area, or how does that come for you all? Any thoughts with that? Anyone wants to share anything on that?
Sorry, I'm just coming in again.
Angela, no problem. Go ahead.
Sorry, just because I think partly my role, finding my role in the business as I've come in, as I said, gathering young people to make sure that we're being innovative and creating opportunities, especially for our local community and our area. But also, for example, tomorrow there's an exhibition on at the SECC. It's Learning Places 2023, and it's for, obviously it's education, but it's obviously digital tech as well. So I'm actually attending that just to try and attract, because I think we live in such a digital world that being a joiner isn't attractive to a lot of young ones. Just looking at it from our business point of view. So to maybe see if there's other more techie ways to try and attract these young ones, because we don't want to give up on it. It's not a case of, well, that didn't work, we'll just go and pay an experienced joiner. We still want to, that's our values, is to try and give back that way. So just by making ourselves available for things like that, and I kind of found that out through attending a Kia conference that they had, and they shared that information with us. So probably looking to bigger companies to help us with that information.
Oh, that's good. I mean, Angela, I think that sort of ties into this idea of sort of bringing all these sort of things into the organization and showing that you are an organization which is moving ahead with time, with technology, sort of can be built into the reputation of the organization, which again creates more of a powerful brand, which again can attract new talent in that way as well. So I think that's really good. So I mean, the next point obviously is diversity and inclusion. I think that's something that we all are aware of. 74% of millennials believe that organizations is more innovative when its culture includes inclusion. 67% of job seekers seek a diverse workforce. So those are things that we move ahead. I think even moving ahead of this, again, technology, again, all these things are important in the modern context now, since we're talking about diversity here. Now, how do we build inclusion in the organization? So that's where I think the recruitment plays a vital role. I think many organizations have this embedded now, but especially for SMEs, I think that's something that you could really look into, how you could bring in people from different walks of life, different experiences, so that it sort of creates not just, it looks good in terms of a company's, profile, who's working from different backgrounds, but also it just adds a different dimension to your team. I mean, they are bringing different perspectives to the organization, clearly. So it just adds a different flavor, I would say, to how things could be done in the organization. So, I mean, that sort of basically covers our initial sort of understanding of how we have people coming on board. So that's what we basically did. So achieving, I would say, an engaged workforce. So we started looking at, obviously, what makes an organization successful, the top sort of workplaces, what qualities that they have. We looked at what really employee engagement means, how engagement can be translated. So that's where we brought in these different enablers. What people really look into the organization when they feel like they want to engage, that's where the facets then came in. And then finally, obviously, we looked at issues of diversity, how it can be also embedded to the organization. Any questions with that section, guys? Is that okay? Any concerns? This is the time for you.
I think it'd be interesting to hear from the Bells guys on this, because that's a larger company. How does the employer engagement work with your company?
I think it's a great question, and I'd say right now it's in transition, because we've gone from what is still a family business, but very much a family business, quite an old style of command and control, type management, to one now that is far more moving much more to far more inclusive. And it's really interesting because you can see the transition, because there's some people that have been in the business for 30, 40 years. And they're not quite sure what's going on, to be honest with you, because they're not used to that. They're used to this very kind of almost reverential view of senior management. And at the end of the day, you know, we're an SME. I'll try to do the same thing. So it's a really, really interesting one. And what we don't have, and which is interesting, is we don't actually have a policy on it. So there's no HR effectively driving this in terms of a diversity and inclusion. We are a very diverse organisation in terms of the nationalities that we have in our business. And whilst Justin and I sit here on the commercial side, we're not strongly male oriented either. We've got a real balance in terms of gender. But there's still this wee bit of this old style autocratic. And you know, that takes a long time. Even when you've changed out of that, as we have now, and transitioning out of that. I've been around for 8 years and I've not really experienced any of that. I've certainly been part of that transition out of it, and hopefully have helped that transition away from that. I don't think it's a particularly great way to operate, but some people are just, you know, they're lacking a wee bit of trust to go with it, because it is far more, to Kenny's point. I really like the point you made earlier about transparency. I think transparency, inclusivity is absolutely vital. And I'm not a great lover either of top-down type style of management personally. So that has actually taken a wee while now. I'm not the MD. The MD's been here a long time, but even the MDs in that time recognised the need to switch into much more of an inclusive type environment. And he's found it hard at times. And there's many times I've actually thought, I feel for you, because you're finding this quite difficult. And that's not uncommon in quite a lot of Scottish SMEs, certainly within the food sector. It's not uncommon to see that, and it's a big transition that we're having to make, and it's the right transition. There's no question about it. Sometimes it can be, thank God we have made moves, but it can be a wee bit archaic in some areas. And I think what helps is that, you know, we've got quite a number of people now at senior level that worked in a lot of different businesses and worked in larger businesses too, and I think that helps.
Perfect. Thank you,
I
Gordon.
think it's difficult when you've got a flat structure, and then one of the challenges I find is, because we've got quite a flat structure in terms of employees and everything else, when I'm very passionate about something and nobody agrees, is asserting that kind of authority at that point and say, well, I know you don't agree, but we're doing it, kind of thing, like sort of thing. So I find that quite difficult.
Yeah. Give me your views as long as you go with mine. And I think that's the key thing. I think if you are going to take that approach, and personally I'm a tremendous advocate of more bottom up. I don't even like that terminology, to be honest, but more ideas coming from within is probably a better way of putting it. So I personally mentally don't see an organisation as someone at the top, and the old style of the kind of triangle type thing. I more see it as a kind of concentric circle, where you might have somebody who's maybe making more of the decisions or whatever, but sitting in the middle almost as a coordinator, actually managing a lot of these things that are going on in the organisation. So it's much more like a concentric circle than it is a triangle, or that kind of thing. And so I just love the idea. And I think if you are genuinely going to go to people and giving your ideas, you've got to listen. And if 9 people are saying, well, we think we should do this, and one person, i.e. me or someone else, is saying, well, no, I want to do it that way. Well, tough. We're not doing it that way, Gordon, because 9 people are saying it's not happening. And you kind of got to listen to that, and you learn a lot. It's back to what you were saying, Azura, about being actually open-minded enough. You've got to be open-minded. You don't go into these kind of situations to manipulate the situation. You go into these situations to understand the situation, and then find out what is the best outcome for everyone. And that's something that I can see with our MD that he's now moving towards. There's a change in his behaviour. And before we felt he had to have all the ideas. Now he doesn't. Now he will come in, and I've seen it now over 8 years, but he'll go into meetings and he sits back far more. And he's like, what's everyone's view? Where do you think we should be going? And he'll listen. And there was one thing actually happened this morning. There was only 3 of us, to be fair, in the discussion. He wanted to go one way, the 2 of us wanted to go the other. And he said, okay, we'll go the other way. And I thought, fair play. So you're actually taking that balance. So it's back to the kind of culture, and I don't know, it's this movement away from, and I think we're still in a transition of command and control overall, and just a much more open. I often think if you just I remember reading, was it the Virgin guy? What's the Virgin? Richard Branson. And said it's not difficult, just treat people as you want to be treated yourself. That's pretty straightforward, quite like that. And I think a lot of it's that. But we get caught up in ego, don't we, and all that. And so I don't know what's right and what's wrong. It's just quite complex.
Thank you so much. Right, so folks,
I think what I said there.
No, I think we're getting it. I think we are sort of leading towards this idea of how now the leaders, we left the best for the last, I would say, how leaders need to sort of play this role. So developing your change in terms of leadership, I think predominantly sort of sums everything up in terms of how change could be transpired and how change could be really transforming in the organization. So basically the sort of process starts where you're first being knowledgeable in terms of how change can happen, having a positive mindset and a growth-oriented mindset, because again, why change is being introduced to the organization is something we all need to understand. We want positivity as well as growth in the organization, and then making sure some of those ideas are being translated, visualized, and applied in the organizational context is where things come down to. Now, change leadership, when you talk about change leadership, it's the ability to influence and inspire action in others and respond with vision and agility during periods of growth, disruption, or uncertainty, bring about the needed change. Now, I know we just spoke about Branson, but you might also have your own leaders that you are inspired by. Something that I look into is in terms of changing leadership. I think something personally that inspires me is especially when you have a strong leader and when they leave the organization. I'll just take the example of Apple, for example. Steve Jobs left such a big, I would say, dent in Apple when he left because of the power and because of the presence he had. But then when Tim Cook stepped into those shoes, those were some next to impossible shoes to fill in the organization, despite how big or powerful Apple is. But then how you then are able to take that massive personality and then translate it to the organization. Look where Apple is right now. So people thought when Steve Jobs, had to leave the organization or left his leadership, Apple would just crash. But now Tim Cook has been able to take it on a different journey. Maybe people might criticize, okay, Apple has lost its innovation. I use innovation in that way, but then, you know, they're not short of making less money than they before. So, I mean, it's simply about how you are able to sort of influence, you put your own flavor and sort of go about and bring about those changes when it's needed as well. So that's an example I just personally look at as well. Again, I'm sure that you might have your sort of own experiences or leaders that you look into. But yeah, we'll leave this thought process for the very end as we go through the section. Now, one of the things that we also need to understand is that when we think about change and when we think about leaders, we also need to distinguish between leaders and managers, what they do in the organization. Now, leaders are people generally who are inspiring this vision. They are entrepreneurs themselves, very creative. They are very authentic. So that's where the integrity, honesty comes through. Are quite open-minded. I think that's what both Gordon and Justin just mentioned. You just want to learn from people. You just learn from different experiences. You are risk takers, adaptable, creative, experimental, using. Yeah, so I think that's where I think Kenny just mentioned using a bit of power when needed. Yeah, some in certain situations. Maybe we'll use not power, something else, just conviction. yeah, something like that. But yeah, it's important in certain situations. But managers, I think, also play an equally important role, because end of the day, as much as you are visionary, if the managers are not really able to empower lower level people, build the team around them, manage resistance, because when it comes to some of the changes, in fact, the leaders sometimes even miss it. I mean, in certain contexts, because it might be at the lower levels where they don't really engage. So managers need to be fully equipped enough to know what exactly is going on, because they are the people who are going to deal with those direct changes, direct resistance and barriers in terms of change. And it's not simply about facing change, it's just about being a bit street smart as well. How do you find solutions on the ground? You know, it's not the leaders who can always give you inputs. Yes, you can still get their ideas, but then how those ideas really translate to the lower levels is something the managers need to really think through. So I think that's where some of that experience, some of that networking, working with people around really helps to solve some of those issues as we go along. Yeah, I mean that's something that I think it's a nice way to put it. First of all, where we understand both the leaders and the managers, and then know what strengths and weaknesses that they bring into the table. So it just helps anyone who's working with them to empower and improve on these changes. Any thoughts on this? Now, have you got into a situation where, I mean, as leaders, I mean, many leaders present here, have you all got into a situation where you've looked at your managers and decided what kind of role that they need to play in the organization when it comes to change? Any experiences with that? Any thoughts anyone wants to share? Any personal experiences?
I think it depends on their personality. I think you get people who are more creative, more kind of visionary, kind of dreamers. They're always they have a place, and then you have your people that are really data focused and realists and everything else, and they've got their place, particularly in kind of finance and strategy. Sorry, I've got the dog's doing my head in today. So I think it depends on the kind of person. I think you have to look at everybody's personality and figure out where they're best placed in the business to kind of help it grow.
No, that's very good. I think that's very important. I mean, that's where I think the leaders need to be quite smart. First of all, identifying not just who's good at what task, but also whether their personalities suit. Now, there might be certain people, managers, who might be quite comfortable working with people who have issues, you know, how to deal with certain conflicts. Again, there might be certain personalities who prefer to maybe engage more outgoing personalities in terms of networking, building connections and so forth. So I think that's where you need to be very smart in terms of who you are sort of having at different roles, so that the changes could be communicated in the right way as we go along. Right. So basically, so guys, this is the sort of summary that I wanted to sort of share. And obviously, when it comes to the workbook, there is a template for you all to work in terms of the changing leaders, and also how that can be obviously translated into the business process as we go along. And that's something that we obviously you will be working on during your sessions. So in summary, we've basically looked at a few things today. So obviously we started off the thought process, first of all, by looking at change in the organization. We looked at transformational change from the force field analysis and the Kotler's model. I think those were some two really interesting models. Obviously, the Kotler's model provided a holistic process from start to finish in terms of how you create a buzz and then you sort of end up with the actual changes. Whereas the force field analysis mainly looked at the resistance side of things and how we could really overcome. So that's where the example also came in quite handy. And then we sort of started looking at how we can bring people on board. So that's where employees matters were started to look into. How do you engage with employees? How do we ensure that they're going to come throughout the process? And then in terms of the actual implementation, the leaders, what kind of role that they play in terms of the engagement. So that's some of the changes and some of the thoughts. Any ideas on the final section? Do you want to, any thoughts? I know that both Gordon and Justin, you had your own sort of thoughts about the leaders, how they could be better in terms of the change process. Anyone wants to share any experiences again as leaders, how you went about? Any thoughts, final concluding thoughts before we sum everything up from section 4? Has anyone used any power?
I'm going to pick on someone. Jim, we haven't heard from you today. Where do you think, how does what we've learned today apply to your business, do you think?
There's a few things today that do apply. There's some that don't apply. I think talking about leadership within our company, I've been a manager there for 6 years probably. And in that time, we have created a small works manager, a project manager that work beneath myself and my colleague. And every manager that is within our company is an electrician. So they have been working for us and taken that step kind of up the ladder, should we say, with some small training courses, but nothing major. And I think that comes down to knowing people's personalities, knowing their strengths, maybe knowing their weaknesses as well and what they can focus on. But probably the most important thing is their leadership qualities and then being in charge of other groups of employees. So it's kind of a different way of doing it, because not one of us at Lotus, apart from the managing director, you would call a businessman as such, but he is an electrician as well. So we're all just electricians playing a manager game, if you like. So, but it seems to be working well. So.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Any more thoughts before we wrap it up? Any thoughts on leadership? Any more conclude? Angela, I think, is there anything?
Yeah, just one last thing. I think I said it on Thursday in our group chat that when we did go through a bit of well, obviously, if I'm coming on board with a landscaper and a joiner who running a company and having the change of a female come in and say, right, okay, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? There was a few times where it was a bit tense, shall I say. So what we did was we realized that we have different visions as such, and we did an insights discovery personality test, almost diagnostic, and we all came out different. We all had our own different colors as such, so it gives you 4 colors: red, blue, green, yellow, and it determines extrovert, introvert, what your leadership skills and weaknesses are. And we were all different. So now when we are having those meetings, we sit with our Lego bricks just to remind each other that if there is going to be tension or a possible conflict, that there's ways that we can how to resolve it as best as we can. And probably we're just missing a blue. We need somebody who's a blue. We're all the other colours, but we're missing the blue.
Can I ask what colour you are, Angela?
What do you think?
I think you're a yellow.
Yeah, you're right. I am the leadership's worst nightmare, probably. They don't like yellows, but there you go. We'll have our. I'm married to a red. That's interesting.
It is.
Brilliant. No, that brings something new to the table, so that's always good. Different perspective. No, brilliant. Yeah, so guys, I think this is I think a very interesting session overall. I think where we are able to not just go through change, I would say, just per se in the organization, but then how we really can almost handhold your employees and sort of work with them, and then finally, obviously, ending up with the changing leadership roles and how they are able to sort of work with us as well. So overall, again, just to summarize, so we looked at the forces and Kotler looked at humans, the personalities, feelings, how changes need to be supported, and the leader's role there. We looked at a couple of examples, and again, how profitability and performance are the key reasons why changes are being brought to the table. And finally, we looked at the personality changes and leadership mindsets that can have an effective impact. So again, obviously you can be working in terms of the workbook for the next steps. I think there's a lot of interesting things that you can do here when it comes to the actual engagement. And yes, so I think that should be it. I think I'm a couple of minutes finishing slightly early in that way, but if there are any more thoughts on this, please do let me know, and we can wrap it up. Angela, I think over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Isira, that was brilliant. Really enjoyed that session. I'm sure everybody did and got quite a lot out of it. The workbooks, I'll send out my usual email after this, and the workbooks this week are really looking at the different models and maybe trying to translate that to your own business. So have a look at the models. There's some templates there to kind of complete with related to your own business. And then of course you've got your growth action plan after that. So we've got our peer group on Thursday where we can discuss this a bit further and discuss everything individual businesses and how it relates to the learning. So I'll look forward to seeing you at that. Next Tuesday we've got an in-person event. So wrapping up this module 9 next week, so in person at Paisley as usual. So looking forward to seeing as much of you there as possible. I think it'll be quite a good session. We're actually getting quite well on through the course now, so there's only really a few weeks left. We're finishing in December, so I'm hoping that you are all getting on quite well, working through all your homework, as I keep going on about. So that's all for today. Unless anybody's got any other comments, but thank you very much to Isira. Thank you all very much for attending, and we shall see you on Thursday or next Tuesday. So unless anyone's got anything else that they want to add.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Isira. Thank you.
No problem. Nice seeing all of you. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks, guys.